Time to check in with our mate in Washington, none other than the great Adam Creighton, the US correspondent for the Australian newspaper, and he joins us now to talk about all sorts of things from politics to Bidenomics. So you've written some really interesting pieces, as always, of recent days, including how Biden is really leading into this idea about all of his policies, which have been big spending. They have had the inflationary effect that has really hurt Americans in the past couple of years. But he's now owning the term Bidenomics. But of course, you used to be an economics editor, so tell me, for average, normal Americans, does Bidenomics actually work?
Well, certainly if you pick up the financial press, as you suggest, you'd be reading about strong economy, robust economy, falling inflation, strong GDP growth, and that's all true. But if you dig a little bit deeper and think about the average American household, the median American household, or even worse still, a younger, 30, 35-year-old head of a household starting out with a family, things are pretty bad indeed. I mean, private sector real wages, once you adjust for inflation, they've had the biggest fall since the late 1970s. So, regardless of what the rest of the economy is doing, and regardless of the unemployment rate, which is a fairly abstract thing for most people, I mean, they're only concerned about their own conditions. Your living standards have fallen, and if you look at the price of two goods that especially young households want to buy or would like to buy, a house and a car, they've gone up dramatically. The price of a house is up 29% in the US on average over the past few years. And the price of a car is up 40%. And that's over a long period of pretty constant prices. So if you're in a position where your real wage is down and the price of a house and a car is up by an enormous amount, plus interest rates have doubled for a home loan to 7%, then you're certainly not going to be buying the celebration about Bidenomics. And one point I make in that piece is just it's a big political risk, I think, for the president going into the election, to be constantly talking about the virtues of Bidenomics, I should say, when you've got those facts on the ground.
Well, again, real wages is one of those indices that can absolutely propel votes. We saw it towards the end of the last Liberal government about how Labor in this country would weaponise real wage numbers. Whether they have spectacularly improved or not is a conversation for another time. I don't think that they've really kicked in here in Australia. But again, in America, where the wages, the minimum wage is so much lower, there are so many other people who have not received a pay rise for multiple years. They're still sort of back in almost 2008 levels of pay. Give me an idea about real wage. An American dollar with George Washington on it. For most Americans, is it demonstrably back? Is it back from the lows? Give me an idea about real wages, because I think you're right. There's politics in that.
Well, look, it's a really hard question, because remember the US is 330 million people, 50 states. The prices of goods and services vary massively across the US, from the regions to the coast, whereas in Australia, it's so much more consistent because, I mean, effectively Australia is just 6 big cities, really.
Yes.
So it's a totally different kettle of fish here. So look, it's a hard question. And indeed, if you look at average wages, that's hard too, because, they're obviously dragged up by your the big bonuses and pay rises at the top. And in the US recently, you've had a lot of big pay rises for highly unionised sectors. The truck drivers, the train drivers, soon to be the car workers, they're all going to get big pay rises. But if you're working for the so-called corner store in the private sector, you've had no nominal increase in your wage at all. I mean, the minimum wage is $7.25 federally, which is about $12 Australian. So it's a lot lower than back home, although some states have their own minimums as well. But look, the median household income in the US, I think I should have looked this up before I came on air, but it's about $60,000 US, I think. So about 90,000 Australian. That sounds a lot, but the price level's a lot more here too. I mean, living in Washington where I am, I'm constantly shocked after 2 years at the cost of things. I'm always comparing them to back home. I mean, the cheapest cup of coffee that you'll get in Washington is about $9 Australian. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let alone the building materials, all the rest of it. Yeah, I mean, look, yeah, Birmingham, Alabama, fair enough, but not a lot of people live there. Yeah. Now, also Bernie Sanders, who of course has championed national minimum wage higher. Well, he, of course, part of his ballywick and a big part of his selling is to focus on the working class. I think you and I would agree that his solutions are not always where the smartest people should go. But he's trying to ring a warning up at the moment that the working class is up for grabs, and the working class is not backing in Biden at the moment, not backing in Democrats. Put simply, he thinks that the Democrats should be way in front, but Trump's still well and truly in the race, and we could talk about that all day. Do you think there's a point in that about the shifting demographics, that the working class is not necessarily about one party anymore? In fact, it may well be trending towards the Republicans.
Yes, look, I think it's true. It was a fascinating speech he gave. It's worth watching about a week ago in New Hampshire. I quite like Bernie Sanders. I mean, I don't agree with a lot of his conclusions, but I mean, he's a good speaker. He's honest, and he's one of those rare politicians who you can tell he actually believes what he's saying very passionately. And he's just he's making the point that there is this flip going on where the Democrats are becoming the party of the wealthy, and the Republicans are clearly becoming the party of the poor. And you can see that clearly in congressional districts. I mean, I was quite shocked to find out that of the top 20 congressional districts by income, 16 of them are now Democrat and only 4 Republican. And overwhelmingly, in the bottom half, I think 62% I calculated of all the poor districts are Republican. So that's a huge change from 40, 50 years ago, and there's various reasons for that. But I mean, the more immediate question, I think, for both parties is to try to win over the swing voters in the working class, many of whom don't pay much attention to politics. They don't read the Wall Street Journal. They don't read the New York Times. And I think, various factors, basically push them away. And one of those might be cultural issues. I mean, I think that's a real reason why a lot of lower income Americans, especially immigrant families, are no longer so drawn to the Democrats, even if their economic policies may be better for them in the short run. But all the talk of, transgender bathrooms and transgender women and all this stuff, it can be very alienating for some conservative lower class people.
Yeah, I'm with you. Got about 90 seconds left before we lose the satellite here. So I want to quickly ask about the fundamental here, where you've got more than half the country who says Trump should have been charged, and of course has been on multiple fronts. Now you've got more than half the country saying the president is too old. As the outsider who is now the insider, it is the fundamental weirdness of the American system where the choices that America will have in the next few months are unenviable, which means we're going to have elections about pretending that the sky will fall in if you elect him and the sky will fall in if you elect him, but then normal people can look at both and see problems, right?
Yeah, look, I think that's right. I mean, there's so much hysterical comment in the US politics. I mean, the reality is the sky's not going to fall in if Trump's re-elected. It's not going to be the end of democracy. It's not going to be a dictatorship. That's just all complete rubbish. And likewise, the US is not going to turn into a communist state if Joe Biden's re-elected. I mean, I think the lesson from January 6th is the strength of the US Constitution, that you can have people doing wacky things, you can have people protesting, but at the end of the day, the Constitution survived. And I think that's the positive message that it should be getting out there more.
Agree completely. Lovely to talk to you, Adam. All the best, and we'll talk to you again very soon from Washington. Thanks, mate.
Indeed.